Well, the Youngstown, Ohio, used to be known as Little Chicago. I mean, they had a tremendous mob presence, as and they controlled the mob, the gambling and the prostitution and the loan sharking down the river in Steubenville, birthplace of Dean Martin. But in that coal, it was a lot of first generation immigrants, a lot of steel workers and coal miners, and it was a ripe area for prostitution and gambling. There was in a little town, there's Steubenville, and just south there, a little town called Mingo Junction, and it used to be Lane's Lounge. And I remember my grandmother going in there. I didn't know what she was doing at the time, but she was going in to play the daily number. And you go into Lane's Lounge, and as my recollection was, he sold newspapers, cigars, and chewing gum, and had a really nice house up on the hill. And I thought, must be a big markup on chewing gum. Of course, he was making all his money on the vig. But you could get the gambling. You could play the parlay in my high school. I could get the parlay sheets. Put down $2 to try to pick three games to win six. And I'm not even sure I knew it was illegal. It was so prevalent. The whorehouses were all down on Water Street. There were two casinos in Steubenville that operated, and the cops were on the take. They knew it, and the mob, they ran everything. So the area I grew up in, I mean, the mob was very prevalent. And then I also covered, organized crime when I was with the Dispatch as a reporter. So I think the what I learned as a reporter was probably secondary to what I knew simply growing up in the Ohio River Valley. And my dad used to say, my dad was a steel worker in Weirton, West Virginia, but he said the reason the economy was so good in the valley and the reason that organized crime was there was because mill workers spent every dime they made, and that money turned over and over, and it was just a ripe area. So, and I was pretty good as a kid, and growing up. I think I was pretty observant, and I knew what was going on, and that was really the basis when I created Angelo, and put him in this novel. So Angelo, he grows up in an area of Steubenville known as the Spaghetto. Poor Italians down in the shadows of the steel mill. And now there really wasn't, as best I know, a spaghetto in Steubenville. I made that up for the book. But Angelo is half Italian, half Ukrainian. He drops out of high school after getting into an argument with a guidance counselor, and takes a job, as a night janitor. But he's a good pool player. And he's 17 years old when he ends up playing pool at the local pool hall with the head of the local crime family, the Fortunatos. And Iceman Al, the godfather, he likes the kid and brings him into the fold. And he's just doing scut work for the longest time, little jobs, washing cars. But it gives him a purpose. And over time, he gets an account where he's collecting money. When Iceman Al is murdered by the Youngstown mob, Angelo wants to be the guy to extract the revenge, who wants to become the hitman who does that. And that is how he makes the jump from, I don't want to say lackey, but low level guy to one of the more important members of the Fortunato crime family. Even though Iceman Al tells him, said that Ukrainian blood is not going to allow you to become a made man. It isn't until later in the book that he becomes a made man, and that's after years of proving himself to the family. But I take him from age 17 and bring him up through the family, while at the same time it's sort of alternating chapters, because the other part takes place in the late 20 teens, when the older members of the family have died and the younger generation has moved the family more toward drugs, and Angelo finds himself, put on the shelf. The FBI knows this, and that's when they're trying to flip him. So he's got this conflict, this years of being a dedicated foot soldier and believing that the omerta means something, at the same time being very resentful that he's been put on the shelf by the younger generation. As you find out in the prologue, where he's basically calling himself a rat. He said, "You don't talk about this, but obviously, I'm writing a book, so yeah, I've made that decision." And he basically says, "Well, I'll let the reader determine if it was justified or not." So he's reflectively telling this book, but in alternating chapters. And the challenge, Jake, what from my perspective was, you got a guy who's a mob hitman, not a really good guy, but he's my protagonist, so I want the reader to root for him. I want them to eventually to like Angelo. So he's got a love interest in there, and he's got a real soft spot for one of the guys from the old guard who's in a nursing home. I mean, he's visits him regularly. He's a good guy. And in the midst of that, he's got this conflict because the FBI keeps calling him and knocking at the door, wanting him to come to the other side. So the reason that he ultimately comes to the other side is there was Iceman Al, who was the godfather who brought him into the family. After Iceman Al gets killed, Big Tommy takes over, Iceman Al's son, and Big Tommy and Angelo are very tight. And after Big Tommy dies of this mysterious illness, Angelo doesn't think anything of it other than probably cancer or something. The FBI informs him that, I don't want to give too much away in the book, but that little Tommy, the son, may have been responsible for that murder, for the death of his father. And when he comes to believe that that was true, then he really has no more use for the family. He's decided that the family that he knew and grew up with, and gave him dignity and status, no longer existed, would never come back. Plus, little Tommy tries to kill him. So, you know, or have him killed. So, that, along with knowing that little Tommy probably killed the father, that was really the final straw for Angelo, and he decides to, he doesn't want to kill little Tommy, but he wouldn't mind seeing him rot in prison for the rest of his life. He has some revenge he needs to take care of. His wife gets killed in the book, fairly early on, and he's got a score to settle, and that remains unfinished when, after little Tommy tries to have him killed. He's trying to get out of Dodge before little Tommy's able to kill him, but also he doesn't want to leave until he extracts his final revenge on the people he thinks were responsible for his wife's death. Joseph Nicolosi. Uh, Joseph had a leg amputated, and he's in a nursing home in Weirton, West Virginia. And Nichols, they keep so drugged up that he goes off on tangents at times that has nothing to do with the conversation at hand. Um, and he also thinks that he gets visited in the morning by Iceman Al, who's been dead for 20 years. So there's some really good interaction between Nichols and Angelo. Also, Nichols is the little Tommy is going to take out Nichols too, because he's afraid that he might talk. So toward the end of the book, Angelo springs Nichols from the nursing home, and when he's no longer on drugs, he becomes the old Nichols. So I really like that particular character. Um, just because there's a lot of fun interaction between the main character and Nichols. The Angelo has a love interest, Carolyn, and um, I like Carolyn. She's pretty spunky, and there's some other minor characters, but those are the two supporting characters that I really liked. I didn't get too attached to the FBI agent. That might, if I do a sequel or something, that might occur, but I didn't get too attached to it. He was more business-like than some of the other those two other characters.